You don't have to make decisions in 5 minutes. You need to listen and show that you're engaging with people to better understand what you're trying to do. And that meant I had to listen to my teams even when they were coming from a different perspective. Because if they've been doing something for 20 years and here comes this guy coming in who wears a hat too often, could we do everything completely differently? Did I just trivialize their entire career? I made missteps. I'm not going to pretend that I have all the answers. I'm very good at making mistakes.
Welcome to Principal Office Hours, where we swear there's no detention slip waiting for you. Just real talk from real principals who've survived everything from budget apocalypses. In today's episode, we talk to the principal of a high-achieving middle school in Pleasanton, California, about how he works with his team in a very organic way to be able to bring out the best in every single individual. He talks about this as creating islands of awesome. So what exactly does that mean, and what are some of the results from being able to do that? All this and more on today's episode of the show. The innovative leadership of our guest today earned his school the prestigious Golden Bell Award for transformative special education programming. Under his direction, his school was also named a school to watch and is the highest ranked middle school in Alameda County in California, while achieving an exceptional 80% student attendance rate. He has a very data-driven and yet deeply humanistic approach to school and has reimagined special education services for his school, dramatically increasing inclusion and creating successful pathways for students with IEPs. It's amazing to have Russell Campisi, the principal of Harvest Park Middle School in the Pleasanton Unified School District out in Pleasanton, California, to join us today. And welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure.
Thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
One of the things that I am amazed by just talking to you is just the amount of accolades that your school gets. Like randomly, we jump on the call today and you've just won yet another award. What's going on there? What's the special sauce that you have at Harvest Park?
I'd say the special sauce is staff, teachers, and the community, the kids. So I had to ride this wave of awesome. Right place, right time. So it takes the whole village, takes district office and everyone to get here. And there's my little role that sort of contributes to the whole entire thing.
So tell us more about the community, the students. What makes them special? How are they supportive of this wave that you're talking about?
This is my 2 cents on it because I'm not from the area, is that families choose to move here to have this sort of intentional, loving experience. So the families that you have here are like, I want my kid to have a great experience, both emotionally and academically. So they're engaged from the get-go. You do have wealth here. It's quite expensive. I think this is a little bit of a suburb of San Jose. So if you want to go to a place that doesn't necessarily have the hustle and bustle of that environment, but has lovely parks, a great downtown, but more of a small town feel, that's why you're here. And they chose to be here. And so they're very invested in the community and they're invested in their kids being successful. Because of that, you have people from all over the Bay Area and all over the world. So the diversity of languages, culture, and community makes it for a very interesting and fun place to be. You just have to be willing to engage with everyone. You need to make sure everybody has a voice and then allow them to express and take advantage of the opportunity to share. So I think when you have all that together, you get the success that we've experienced.
And do you find the expectations that the families have, communities have, or the community was a lot higher on the staff, on your leadership, on the district office? Do you feel any pressure that comes from that?
So I think when you're engaged in a dialogue around your child, who's one of the most important beings in your life, you would have high expectations necessarily. I think no matter where you are, you would have that. Not everyone has the opportunity to be as available as some of our parents are. And that's a little bit of that sort of wealth opportunity and other things that go along with it. But I would say that once you start talking about their child, they expect you to be all in. But what's great is that means you have a very engaged partner. And so you can push for things that maybe haven't been done before and get a lot of movement around those things, especially when the parents care about it and the kids care about it. So in terms of high expectations, I think it's more about like when you want the best for your family. And then in terms of whether it's academics, for example, Yes, you have push for those things, but you have that all over the place. I think what makes it more nuanced and interesting here is that because of the Bay Area, because of our proximity to San Jose, because of people's specialties, we have a wide variety of specialists who want to support different programs. So that includes music. We have bassoon specialists here that include our new civics program, We the People, where we did just find out that in our very first year, we won for Best Unit 6, which was on citizenship in America, very timely discourse. We just had that recently announced. Or our VEX 5 competitive robotics team that just started this year. And that can only happen because of an engaged population.
Got it. It sounds like the main strategy is engagement, but what gets you to the achievement is really everyone just pulling together and trying different things and doing their best. And it sounds like they're doing really well. And do you find that your role becomes much more of a conductor, making sure that everyone's aligned in the right directions and ensuring that implementation goes well? I know you're big on implementation. What does that mean to you in this kind of context where everyone's already pretty engaged, pretty motivated? How do you steer that implementation in the right direction?
I think once you have the perspective of the relevant partners, whether that's district office, that I think reads the community really right now. And you have to talk to kids. You have to make sure you're meeting the kids where they are and what they're hoping to do. I think once you have the momentum around it, it's about making sure we have the right pathways. And from there, you're creating like your islands of awesome. So you'll have someone who can be a leader for that project who can take it away. I couldn't possibly lead all of these things. It's a false assumption that I did all of these things. I didn't do, but I was a part of some of these things. I played a role in some of these things. So it's finding out what the vision is, what the goal is, and how resources are distributed, who's in charge of it, how is this going to work and be sound and be safe for kids and stuff like that. So in terms of implementation, I'd say the thing that I'm trying to do is to find the right person who can make sure that it actually occurs, when it's going to occur, how it's going to occur, how we're going to make sure everyone's involved, how are we accounting for things. On the note of inclusion on our campus, we brought back sports after distance learning, but how are we going to make sure that everybody has access? And so we ensure and pay for support staff to be there for kids who may have physical limitations or other, so that they can be on the track team, so that they can play basketball and badminton and other things after school. So it's just making sure those logistical pieces come together. I guess you could say I'm like a glorified party planner, but it's just making sure that all those things actually happen in a reasonable amount of time.
And you mentioned this concept of islands of awesome. Talk to how this party planner of yours, you're like the mixed metaphors. Do you see yourself as this party planner that's just planning across these different islands of awesome? And how do you nurture the awesome within each of these islands?
You're going to find people's passions all the time as long as you're talking to them. So I think if you're locked in your office, you're not going to have an opportunity to see what people care about. So you have to create relationships. Everything's relationships. You want to talk to them about what their goals have been, where they've been, what they're trying to do, where they're going. So we have a great after school program. So mandatory study hall that does a lot for helping kids to learn executive functioning skills. I heard about that on an off day talking to somebody who's wonderful, a great teacher here, Cherry Wilder. And after they explained to me how they would do it, what the logistics would be, what their inclinations were, about 5 minutes later, we started that program because I knew where we were going with it, what we were trying to accomplish. And their aim was that they wanted kids to be able to be independent. And I didn't know that was their passion. They talked to me about it. When I was talking with Greg Dancourt, one of our fantastic teachers here who does leadership as well, he was talking about how kids just really need a chance to play basketball in intramurals without there being like a trophy attached, just be able to play. And from there, we start creating intramurals where you aren't trying out for a team, but it's like, when and where is that going to happen? How are we going to make sure that it's safe? So you find these things that kids really care about, or teachers really care about, or both. And then you support around that. So that might be a few teachers who all go in on mandatory study hall, or who go in on VEX 5, our robotics team. And then you get the people together who care about it. And there's your island. And you help them to continue. I don't have to micromanage that. You want to find people where you can create these sort of passion projects, and then it can disseminate and distribute around campus. I think there's a false notion that if we say, all right, we're all going to just do this, and I said it all at once, that we've baked a perfect cake. I think sometimes you just have to let people like make your ice cream over here and make your cupcakes over here. And then together we've made a really good meal, but you can't presume you're just going to say that we're all going to do it all at once. It has to look exactly one way. And the only way is that. So I think starting with Islands of Awesome, the more awesome it is, it usually starts to subsume and spread, and you get yourself like a little continent. You got Australia, right? So I think that's a little bit more of the approach.
Got it. Now, you talked about making cakes and making ice cream. As a leader, though, do you find that what if somebody wants to do something that's not dessert, like completely outside? They might want to make some random pie, right?
Oh, yes.
Ribs, right? Or some barbecue ribs. How much do you think you want to pull people together so that your meal is coherent and everyone's doing things in broadly the same direction?
Maybe we can use this as the reference. If we're talking about like the Golden Bell, for example, we're talking about how we do special education. That did not start broadly, like with the whole campus all immediately. There were notions around how we were going to come back from distance learning and what it would mean to make sure all kids could be successful. And that was the emphasis. So you always have to have a frame that goes with these things. The dilemma is coming back from distance learning. You define that dilemma, which is how do you socialize with your peers and adults, which the kids could not do as effectively as they could. What are the gaps academics that they were going to have? Two-digit multiplication, fractions, conversions, stuff like that. What does it mean to mediate? What does it mean to self-regulate? So you define these dilemmas, and then you need like a centralized frame, at least in my opinion, that brings it all together. And how are we going to ensure access social emotionally and academically to success for our kids? So there's like your frame. That you can disseminate across your whole campus, but then you have to allow for ingenuity to take place. And then you have to allow for the opportunity and facilitate the opportunity for people to share their discoveries along the way. Though meetings can be the death of fun if you feed people. So I am making ribs tomorrow. I know that was a part of the metaphor, but I'm literally making ribs tomorrow for staff. Those ribs have their place, right? Just like the cake has its place. And so you start finding all the through lines that connect all of these innovations together. Now, if one individual is doing it, it doesn't take away from anything else. You let people have their passion because kids are engaged and satisfied and happy. And just because I don't maybe understand it doesn't mean it's not doing good. In terms of that coherency, that frame, vision, which every school site brings it together. And it does, of course, align district wide to the organizational goals of the school district. And so from there, it's building pockets that make sense within that coherency. And part of that leadership is making sure that they're congruent with each other enough such that they don't take away from one another.
That's great. I think that's very clear in terms of how to balance the different competing needs while at the same time allowing for those islands of awesome to flourish. You mentioned the Golden Bell, and I want to focus on that as a good example of how all of this comes together. For those of us who might not know, like the Golden Bell is a big deal. Tell us just how big a deal it is.
So the California State Board Association once a year tries to recognize innovations, one per district where you've done the application, where of multiple years data that really speaks to a sustainable and effective process. And it needs to be district wide, right? It needs to have effect across the board. So in prior years, we had one for girls who code. So we saw girls really engaging coding K-12 with Kevin Kioy, who's a wonderful teacher in the district. You may actually change how you do accounting in the district such that the systems in place are much more effective and you're more efficiently spending money that meets kids where they are. So there's lots of ways of doing this, not only one. For us, it was a sustainable process for doing inclusive programming for kids who have services, particular special education services, and how we got them into what you'd call the general education space, where they can take electives like other kids, where they can be in English classes like other kids and math classes like other kids. And we had multiple years where we were able to build up these trends and see, oh, this is really working. And not only that, it worked for all kids on campus. It raised all boats. So that occurred. We got the award this year. It started roughly when I first got here in 2021.
Got it. And just to give everyone a sense of how prestigious this is, like how many applications were there? You guys were selected from a really large pool. Like maybe give the listeners some sense of like how prestigious.
I don't know like all the specifics, but there's roughly 1,000 school districts. You might have a few hundred who apply each year, and then you might have anywhere from 50 to 70 who get it each year. It's usually you have to have your board be involved. You have to have your executive cabinet be involved. It's a district-wide supported process. Ours was a little bit more centralized on our school sites because you couldn't necessarily do that all at once unless it was more of a top-down process, and ours was more of an organic one. But what we're saying here is this is something that the rest of California could imitate. Superintendent Thurman tends to use programs like this to say, hey, this is something we should actually consider. So when your superintendent is saying this is a good idea, and I think one of the last ones he referenced was mental health support in, I think, maybe San Diego, it's a big deal. And they present, hey guys, this is something that you should be aware of. So once a year, they bring all the boards together and they say, hey, this happened here. This is something that you should be aware of.
Got it. And that's the award. Topic area was around special ed programming. How did you land on that as a focus area for anything that needed an initiative, first of all, and then something that you felt was good enough to put in an application for the Golden Bell?
So I think I already had ideas, preconceived notions around this, but if you're talking about from a general leadership perspective, you pull the data from your school site over multiple years. I think I did 4 or 5 years. And I looked at every single sort of student outcome, attendance, grades, et cetera. And I saw a disparity with those who had services. Data is not great for maybe giving answers, but it's a good place to start with questions. And so from there, I came into the school site with all these questions. And then I spent about 90 days asking these questions and trying to figure out what was going on from teacher leaders. I did do a 3-day barbecue before school started to get to know my staff and then ask these questions and make sure I could frame the dilemma. So when the school year started, we called it a strong start. So we could say, okay, we've framed all the dilemmas that we have. We know that we're going to work on this for the whole entire year. There don't need to be like any more curveballs than we were already experiencing with COVID. What are we going to do to help kids have access to success for emotional support and academic support? What you saw was, how do we do special education? What is it that we're doing? What are we trying to accomplish? All those questions start being asked, and you start to hear answers that don't necessarily pair with inclusion. So for example, maybe one of the classics is, they have an IEP so we can protect the kids. One of the big questions you come from is, from whom? Who are we protecting these kids from? And the sad reality is, you might say, from other adults, right? Some other educators, which when you start going through it, you start to realize that a lot of these supports and services may not be necessarily as supportive as you would like towards that kid having the best possible experience. And we're all in education to be loving and kind. And I think it's, how do we get to this? And it really came down to having these conversations about what our intent was. What does the data show? Why are they in these different spaces? What is the intent of the legislation around these different things? And so what we ended up finding was that there were some certain notions on what we were doing that maybe didn't correspond with more modern research. We now know that having kids with services in general education spaces tends to lead with greater connectivity, better attendance rates, greater happiness, frankly, and better academic results. And so as we went through that together, we started to see, oh, wait, there is a different way that we could be doing this that's more effective. And we started to build out a plan from there.
Got it. So you were guided by the data to ask some questions about your special ed programming, and you realized that there were some parts of that programming that were not aligned with current best understandings in the research. But what made you decide to invest effort, time, energy into improving this? There must be tons of other priorities that you have on any given day.
It is really easy to focus on kids who we all love and who have unique needs and who we've been trying to figure out our whole careers to support. When you have the collective energy of all the staff trying to figure that out and sharing, you're going to build momentum. And I'm a big fan of building that momentum. I didn't come down from on high and say, this is right and this is the only way. That's my whole thing about, like, right isn't always right. If you start yelling at people that way, you can inadvertently trivialize all the work that they've been doing throughout their entire career. You have to be very careful around that. What we're doing right now is figuring out where are our next steps from this starting point. And so when you start talking about those kids, we have a legal obligation to support. We have black and white, very clear lines. It makes it much easier to talk about. And so you start saying, we're going to write this, and this is a legal requirement. And you talk to the rest of the staff. The staff go, we want to support these kids, because no one's going to say no to supporting these kids. Okay, we know we want to support these kids. We know it's a legal requirement, but what should we do? How should we do it? And it creates a very productive conversation. I'm not having a lot of pushback around whether we ought to. It's the how. And so you can come to maybe some basic understandings, like in a very simplistic sense, we take 3 student types to consider when we're talking about how we're going to create lessons. A kid who might be unable to see it such that they can digest the content, for lack of a better term, say someone who might be blind. a student who could have ADHD. So it's not that they aren't paying attention, they're just paying attention to everything. And then you have a student who may be on the autistic spectrum who also has anxiety. For those three students, how would you construct a lesson that would ensure that those kids want to come to class, they feel safe in the class, they can learn the content effectively? And then you just have to allow people to express their ideas, put them together, and then we all within departments and across the school, and we try and figure out how we're going to do that. So that focus makes it easier to implement things, implement steps. How do you do grading for mastery? Were we doing grading for mastery before? Was it a group-based grade? You can't use that when you're doing a IEP or an annual IEP or a triennial. When you're talking about that kid reaching their goals, again, we are legally obligated to help them get to their goals. I can't say if we're in a math class that like their participation defines all their grade. No, we're looking at the skill. Can they do long division? And so it starts to focus on those things that we think are actually very important and specific. So it was a way of helping the kids who needed to be helped. And it was a way of actually then expanding that understanding to the rest of the campus. Because if we're new for these kids and we know it's best practices, why not do it for everybody? Doesn't matter where you're from or who you are. So it is a way of approaching, a way of asking questions, a way of focusing. And it worked out quite well to do that moving forward.
Got it. And back to the data, like what were some examples of data points that jolted you into action?
So I'd always recommend for data, and it's different in secondary versus primary because you have to decide where grades are in this. The typical grades, it was like 72% of all grades given in our school district, maybe 72, 71, were just threes. And on a scale of 4, sometimes you just can't tell from those pieces of information what's going on. In secondary, you start to see like a separation of things. And grades are personal. They're often very specific to, at the secondary level, specific to your teacher. They're very personal, which is why you have to be very careful how you talk about them. You need to build protocols around those things. But in an ideal world, those grades correspond with mastery, which corresponds with the state exam, which corresponds with internal or common assessments that you're using. So I look at all grades for all students. I break it down by ethnicity, programming, and other demographic data, by period, by teacher. And I looked at it from roughly 2018, 19 until now. And I just do comparisons to see where there are trends. Then you have state exams, which will correspond with that. You have your internal assessments. We've been using MAP for years, Lexile levels, et cetera, to try and find patterns that went with it. And then from there, start having conversations, all staff, departments, and individuals. And so from there, you start being, okay, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What's the hope that's supposed to come from this? You start to realize that these very personal allocations of grades are emblematic of what the person believes about education or believes are good for the kids and stuff like that. And from there, again, when you use special education as a focus, if the grade is supposed to exemplify whether they've met their goals, because if you reach your goals in special education, let's say hypothetically you meet all of your goals, you're doing great, school is successful, you no longer need those services anymore. And that's what we're working towards, because then you're independent. You don't need us to serve in those areas. And so the grade is a data point, but if the grade is unrelated to that mastery, it's unrelated to those things that we're judging, what does this kid need, then they are dysfunctional. I, as a principal, can't allocate funds for interventions if the grade doesn't correspond. So like I saw a teacher who I looked at like quarter grades too. So like quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. And right before the grades were done, this teacher had 30 or 40% of all students with services had A's in the class. But on the last day of school, it was only 11%. So I went to this teacher and there was a drop that was very significant. So why? And the teacher said to me, because I wanted to make sure they understood how hard 7th grade was. And this person's brilliant. They're amazing. It's just how we perceive grades, right? It's a very personal thing. And we had a conversation. I said, well, what do I do with that? Because we aren't teaching 7th grade standards. We're talking about 6th grade standards. And how do you know 7th grade is hard? Have you taught 7th grade? And the answer is no. And it was a preconceived notion, again, about what the world is like, how we're doing, about their beliefs, what their assumptions are. And we had a lovely conversation and we came to an agreement, which is I just need the grades to represent what they know so that I can allocate resources to support them. So again, data is good for questions, not necessarily for answers. Who knows? If I tried to make up an answer, I never would have come up with that one. And then all of that comes together to, okay, now we come back to our next dilemma. The kids are not being successful and they would have assumptions. Is this a skill or a will thing? What the different things are. And typically speaking, it fell into the will category and they made certain assumptions about that. And we had to be like, I went and talked to all the kids, just asked every single one of them. Some kids didn't feel safe. Some kids had academic gaps, again, because of distance learning or other things. We made the grades about the teacher had a really high DF rate. I think it was 67% one time with kids with special needs. And I was like, why? And it was because they had been leaving their artwork in their cabinets, in their lockers, and they hadn't walked it to the teacher. Sometimes with certain individuals, you have to be very explicit. And I was like, I think if they completed the work, what I want to know is, did they know how to do it? Did they draw Pikachu or whatever they were supposed to do? I need to know, but if they didn't walk it to you, is that a part of your standards? What are we trying to accomplish here? And so that data point allowed us to get to, I need to use this. Some of them have goals associated with their ability to physically manipulate objects. So art is actually a fantastic place, both for joy, having a great time, but also judging have we met our physical goals around manipulation of objects. That person completely changed their grading system to be a little bit more representative of art standards so that we could say that it's really about that. And they just went, hey, you need to come up and bring your stuff so I can give it a grade. It's a very simple solution. So you start to have a vision. Again, the small population on our campus, which really only represents 5 or 6%, ends up helping us to focus for everyone. And our test scores kept going up and up. This wasn't necessarily a hindrance. I would also like to pair this with when it comes to implementation, things should be more sustainable. In the old model, one person was always supposed to be the hero, work 80 or 90 hours a week, solve all these problems, do it on your own. But now admin becomes a part of that solution. The general education teachers become a part of that. You actually are asking them to do less. And when it's more sustainable, it's more likely to stay if I'm gone. It's more likely to be something that the union can back. So from an implementation perspective, and that actually goes with the golden bell as well, is it has to be a sustainable approach. Doing something as a one-off that's amazing that took an extra $1 million is very hard to back as a system for the rest of California.
So it sounds like there was quite a lot of emphasis on some of these practices that ostensibly touch on just the special education population, but it really had a much broader impact. What were some of the very tangible things that the team and yourself had to implement in order to facilitate this change?
So I'm going to take it from my role and my approach, and then also what was there. So one is just how do you process data? What are state standards? What is even as a class? So like, for example, let's take a self-contained English class. The assumption that they made is that if a teacher who is a case manager, who has a credential in teaching special education, it's teaching an English class, which similar content, similar things, is basically like a general education class. And I had to clarify, no, in CalPAD, that's how we assign that on the state side of things, California State, based on the ed department. That counts as a self-contained setting and not a general education class. And that was new for some of us. Not everybody knew that. So you had to clarify standards and what you're trying to accomplish. And then it's how do you implement? We talk about how. If this is true, you have to talk about minutes of service. How do you say I'm going to accommodate? And we reevaluate every single accommodation. But then how do you communicate around accommodations? Well, the classic example is the student needs a graphic organizer. Was that like a Venn diagram? Do you like ball up a Venn diagram and throw it at them? What does that even mean? So we had to talk about what it even meant. And it was like, we really want a readable and referenceable notes to tell the student what it is that they need to do. And it arranges the content in digestible form. That's not a graphic organizer. That's something else, right? So it's how we communicate these different needs to them needs to be different. So we completely redid that. There's almost nothing that was not touched in every aspect. How do you co-educate with someone in the classroom? How do you come to agreements on these things? When people say co-teach under the ideal model, you're doing common planning time together. You have a credential in that area. You're teaching together, which is awesome. But a case manager couldn't do that for all subjects. That's not actually feasible. You typically will do it with like just English. It's very hard, especially at the high school level, to have a co-teacher for chemistry and physics and calculus and all these different things. So you can do it in spots, and it can work, absolutely. But it also is very hard from a sustainability standpoint to make it work. Part of what we do here that's different than places is we want the kids to not all be clumped in one place and tracked. Ideally, 3 kids per class who may have services so that every general education teacher is supporting these kids. Everyone can collaborate around these things. But that is a systemized thing that you have to understand. If you do your minutes even slightly off by 1 minute, it's the difference between having 8 kids with IEPs in the classroom and 3. So I had one teacher who had 22 kids with IEPs, and now she has 3. And she has said, way easier for me to support them and give them more time without burning herself out, without playing hero ball in this way. So those are like practical pieces. And you have to know in the end, everyone, if they're trying to change special education at school site, you just have to become a specialist. There is no way around it. You can't be scared to engage in the discourse. This is another important aspect. You have to include your executive cabinet, your directors, your teachers, your community members. This can't be a solo project. These are all legally binding things. So everybody has to be involved. I had to ask for approval from my associate superintendent who oversaw this. I had to ask for approval from the superintendent. I had to include the board in what I was doing. I'd bring board members to my school to go through data so I could share what was going on. This has to be an open process and not just transparent, but clear. I think it's fine to say transparent where everything's out, but it's like gobbledygook. You have to make it clear so everybody understands what you're trying to accomplish. And you have to understand timing. Teachers are admin at the secondary level build their master schedules roughly starting February 1st. You have to have made your decisions in November. And if you don't, then you're off by another year. You have to understand the timing of these different things. So like, for example, part of the issue with having this all be secluded decision-making, you won't necessarily include all the people who pull the levers that make these things happen. You have to keep including the right people. And that meant having extra meetings. My first year, I did 3 department meetings a month, not 1, because I had to talk to them. I had barbecues every summer to just go through what we're trying to accomplish, because you need everybody to know expectations. Because if you're the pinch point, every decision has to go through you. Everything is too slow. You have to release. If everything is going through you, like they wait in line, what about this? What about this? What about this? The innovation is now you. So by making yourself a comprehensive person who understands these different pieces and then disseminating that information, you no longer have to be the person who's involved in all those different things. And so now my assistant principals can do this. My department heads can now do this. They don't need me to help make decisions on every single aspect of this, which is why this comes off so fast. Most of this work was done in 2 years because people could take it themselves and be responsible within the area around a dilemma and a frame that was very clear. Now, this doesn't mean it's done. All these things are inherently messy. Some people love certain aspects of this, some people don't. But we still have made that progress that's undeniable. And that's because of these sort of like different methodologies. So I'm a little bit more on the yes and side. I don't say but. I'm not starting off with no. I'm trying to understand. So from a sort of skills perspective, the skill I'm emphasizing is listening and learning. You don't have to make decisions in 5 minutes. You need to listen and show that you're engaging with people to better understand what you're trying to do. And that meant I had to listen to my teams even when they were coming from a different perspective, because many of them, I had to think about this very carefully. If they've been doing something for 20 years and here comes this guy coming in who wears a hat too often, could we do everything completely differently? Did I just trivialize their entire career? Did I say something that was harmful? You have to think about those things. I made missteps. I certainly made mistakes. I'm not going to pretend that I have all the answers. I'm very good at making mistakes. So I had to listen and give them the opportunity to say no to me. So even though I try to get to 100% agreement to try a thing, it doesn't mean we 100% all see it or we all believe every aspect of it. 100% sort of agreement. Certain people were like, then I say no, and now you're not at 100%. And I had to say, yes, okay, fine, that's okay. But we get to keep talking about it. And so there ends up being this sort of genuine approach. I did have an associate superintendent who was like, that's a terrible idea. If you have to wait to 100%, this is not going to work. But the staff has been very loving and very supportive, and they're brilliant. The hiring that's happened at this school site before I ever got here brought in these brilliant and amazing people who made this actually feasible. I didn't magically like wave a wand and solve all these problems myself. The people here did. I just created the frame and basic understanding around it.
Yeah, I mean, from what you're describing, it certainly sounds like there was a lot of iterations of clarifications and explanations and digging deeper into certain things. You sound like you really just had to roll up your sleeves and get into the weeds of what exactly does this accommodation entail? What exactly does this modification in class entail? How does that impact our master schedule? At any point, this kind of like broad like framework that you had that said, okay, we're gonna change in these 5 ways, A, B, C, D, N, or was it?
I would love to be so organized a person to be able to do that. I use heuristics that you are aware of that sort of guide my approach. I think having that clear vision and framework is necessary. And then from there, you just start asking about it. You know, what I didn't know that my community wanted a civics team that wanted to discuss and debate constitutional law. That was not something I came in thinking about. But what I asked was, what do you think these kids need that is not STEM related? And then a teacher pointed out being an engaged person in society is a big deal. And this is a program that could help. And then I learned about We the People, and we created a whole team around it and went to DC and did all these wonderful things. But it's more that I asked the question, what do we think we need to do? From we started our wellness center, that was in reaction to this incredible depression and anxiety that our kids were experiencing. I went to my counseling team, just brilliant team, Jen Simpson and Maddie Lee. I was like, what do we do? Like, I'm interested in a wellness center that could have services. And Jen was like, I got it. There's your island of awesome. And I was like, cool. So do I need to do stuff? And obviously, like, I help. The joke around campus is that I know wherever sewer line is on campus because there's been a lot of construction on our campus. And I'm just bad enough to get myself in trouble as a carpenter. And so I've been working with district office for 4 years to make spaces that work well for kids on budget. And so we were able to make a wellness center that's just brilliant, that our PTSA helped with and that district helped with and that the board helped with, and is an award-winning and amazing sort of program that includes our PBIS programming led by Maddie Lee, one of our counselors, that has these positive behavioral supports where kids feel more connected and happy and satisfied. Look, I got a small herd of llamas coming tomorrow that are social
No way.
support, emotional support llamas. I didn't come up with that. I didn't even know that was an option. So as far as I could tell, the wool had been pulled over my eyes. I also have terrible jokes. You find people have this understanding of how to support kids, but they need like a conduit. Over and over again, I try to be a conduit, not a filter. And I tell it to my staff, if we're being filters, we're missing the point. We are conduits. You're not putting down a grade to say the kid can't do something. We're putting down a grade that says they can or they need support to further their understanding. But it's not a filter as we go through. Another sort of Russellism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fascinating that your leadership is driven by heuristics and it somehow finds a way to bring out the best in people that you have surrounding you. And some of these are really interesting. Be the goldfish. What does that mean?
It's now used ad nauseum because of Ted Lasso, but be the goldfish is you're going to hit a lot of emotional. So I guess the way I frame it is, are you Velcro or are you Teflon? When you're Velcro, everything hits and you can't let it go. When you're Teflon, it can bounce off. If you're going to engage in tough discourse around these things, you're going to have a lot of emotions come up. We systematically addressed racism on campus, and I wanted every single person on campus to be able to do it. All roughly 78 of us had to be able to have a conversation around those things. Those are tough conversations. You still have to have it. I had tough conversations with people one-on-one where it needed to be one-on-one so that we could talk about how we're going to support our teachers and our kids and our community members around these different things. But if you hold on to some of the negativity that's there, you're not going to be able to move on. So the classic example, this is Steph Curry, where it's like you missed your first shot, you can still make your second. I want to say maybe the word here is to facilitate people's inherent brilliance and awesomeness. I would say more like a facilitator. My two assistant principals are just incredible people who are smarter, faster, better than me. And both of them can be the goldfish. They can move on instantly from an issue that has arisen to do their best work after that. And you have to coach teachers around that. If they have an off first period, it can't be off for the rest of the day. You have to be able to move on from those things because you're going to fail. And if you can't let go of that failure, it's going to eat you alive. And that's part of the sustainability piece. It won't be sustainable if you can't do that. And that's where be the goldfish comes from.
Got it. So it's really being able to let things go and move on with the next thing. What about smoke is for barbecue?
I lived in Texas for a while. So I have barbecued a lot. That's where the 6 racks of ribs are coming in tomorrow. And I usually smoke meat for 10 hours for the district office. A lot of this has all had food and community. We work with people all day long. And these are the people that end up just like, I love the people that I work with. I love the community that I'm a part of. And I'm with them a lot of every single one of my days. Smoke also, don't lie. Just tell the truth. You don't need to fake it in that way. You do need to do your job. You do need to fill the potholes. You have to make sure, another Russellism 655 or whatever. You got to make sure all the bases are covered. If you don't have copy paper, there'll be a riot. But you need to be clear. That's what I mean by that whole transparency, clarity difference. You need to be clear on what's going on, what we're trying to do, and not be scared to share those things. From an implementation perspective, you have to say, depending on what we come up with, here's how we could do it. You do have to help people see how it could be done in a sustainable way. I think that's one of the biggest parts of being an effective leader. But you don't need to lie such that your islands of awesome and other people can help you solve those problems. You have to be able to be genuine with them. You can get to a reasonable solution. I think that is respectful to them and respectful to the process.
Got it. And with all your Russellisms, if you were addressing a peer, another principal in another school, and you were to pick one of these that your peer could try, that you're pretty confident would make the school a better place, like which one would you pick?
I think the island of awesome is the easiest one for everyone to understand because it encapsulates a lot of the other advice that goes along with it. When you are creating an island of awesome, you have to listen to people. So when you listen to people, you're going to hear where they're coming from, what they're trying to do, and then you're allocating your resources, and that creates a personal bond with someone who will be defined by this. I have repeatedly nominated Teacher of the Year someone who didn't necessarily agree with me on things. Agreeing with me is overrated. Being passionate and effective and caring and professional is really what we need to be. And as you help them to enact that vision and create something special for their kids that you didn't really have a lot to do with, it's somebody else. They have pride in themselves. And they're also now more likely to take risks with you, whatever that might be. It's not a tit for tat. It's not just because I did this for you, now you have to do this for me. That can't be the expectation for the relationship. In many cases, I've helped someone. That doesn't mean they owe me anything. But what you start to see is the kids are happier. The kids feel more successful because you helped someone with their vision. And maybe that's just agreeing to pay for something. Maybe that is staffing in a certain kind of way. But I think if you can create as many islands of awesome, that's a great first step.
Just talking to you over the course of this episode, it does sound like that ability that you have, maybe it's innate, maybe you grew it over time, but being able to nurture and create these islands of awesome and let them run and be able to still facilitate them running in the right direction or growing to build a continent that was cohesive does sound to be a really maybe unusual leadership strength that you bring to the table. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your stories and your Russellisms with us today so generously. I'm sure many of us listening would be able to take away one or two of these and apply it immediately. And for all of you listening, thank you for listening. Do hit us up in the show notes to be able to see more Russellisms. And we might even be able to share some of the cool stuff, the full write-ups on that Golden Bell application and what Russell and his team have been up to at the school. Thanks for listening. I've been your host, CT. And until next time, keep leading with purpose and passion. And that's a wrap on today's Principal Office Hours. Before you rush off to put out the next school emergency, take 2 seconds to subscribe. It's way easier than getting your budget approved. And if you liked what you heard, head over to principalofficehours.com to sign up for weekly updates on the show. Also, the best compliment would be to tell your friends about us, especially the ones who look like they need therapy or a career change. We're going to be back with fresh principal insights and inspiration every week. Until then, keep being the leader that your ID badge says that you are. See you next time.